Welcome to the first episode of Sienta's new podcast series, Life in Science, where we speak to key leaders within the life science space to understand their experience within the sector. In this episode, our management consultant, Will Tarbox, sits down with one of the partners at MPM Capital, Floranica Segal, to talk about her journey into infectious diseases, the future of patient care, and building a successful drug development plan. We hope you enjoy.
Well, thanks so much, Florencia, for joining me on Biotech Frontiers. Like I said, I wanted to connect with you and just discuss a bit more about you, why you chose to be a physician and a bit more about your career. So I guess it would be great to, understand a bit more about, your personal and professional background and what inspired you to pursue a career in medicine.
Yeah, I think I was always really curious about the physiology and pathophysiology, sort of how the body works or how the body doesn't work when you're sick. So I think my primary motivation to pursue medicine was really curiosity, sort of scientific curiosity about sort of mechanisms of how things work and don't work. And then, during the time when I was training, I sort of fell in love with the service side of the profession. It's a very rewarding profession in a very short period of time. There are very few things that you could really see, almost immediate rewards. So that was a big part of it as I did my training and sort of practice clinical medicine. So, yeah.
And did you, obviously, like you said, I suppose it was a broader, probably understanding or interest. But when did you start to learn that you had more of a love for infectious diseases?
Well, I did my medicine training in Venezuela. And, during that time was sort of the peak of AIDS. We didn't really have a lot of therapies, effective therapies for HIV infection at the time. So, a big component of our medical training was really treating patients with infectious complications from HIV. And I found those really fascinating. And I think in low and middle income countries and in tropical areas, infectious diseases is probably the leading cause of morbidity and mortality. We had less of the sort of metabolic diseases that we see now, cardiovascular diseases and cancer, and a lot more of infectious diseases. So very early on, I was sort of fascinated by infectious diseases. And then the other thing that attracted me to that specialty was that you can really intervene and make people, cure them relatively quickly, also with 1 or 2 weeks of therapy sometimes, or 5 to 6 weeks. And that's really not the case for chronic diseases. So that sort of aspect of, again, being able to make a real difference in a relatively short period of time was sort of attractive.
Yeah, no, 100%. I can understand why it is, so attractive. But I guess for you, did you have a kind of a clear roadmap of how your career was to be structured in terms of, was it a fellowship, residency, and then transitioning to industry, or did that kind of evolve as time went on?
I think everyone who's training to be a physician has somewhat of a clear training path to become a practicing physician, and that's typically medical school, internship, residency, fellowship. So that part of it was pretty straightforward, or sort of somewhat understood that I was going to follow that path, because again, I did fall in love with clinical medicine. But all the other pieces in terms of research and industry and the type of industry, whether it's drug development or now I'm in sort of in the venture investment business, all of that was really opportunistic. As the opportunities arose, I sort of jump onto them when I felt like they were, exciting or meaningful personally or professionally. So not so much of a roadmap. In fact, before I chose infectious diseases, for a while, I thought I was going to be a pathologist because, again, I was fascinated about physiology and pathophysiology, and pathologists are traditionally sort of the doctors that actually get to the diagnosis, with a biopsy so. There's always forks in the road, right? And you make a decision at one point, about following one path, but and certainly after did my infectious diseases training, there was another fork in my path, which was, do you continue to practice clinical medicine or do you go into research? And then do you continue research in academia? Do you go into industry? So there always been different forks on the road for sure. But a certain amount of training is somewhat well established in medicine.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the most frequent questions I get from physicians, like you said, that are doing their training. And sometimes I feel there's almost a desire to kind of plan everything all the way up to becoming a CMO. And I think, you know, the beauty of kind of, like you said, being opportunistic and when an opportunity comes along and taking it, potentially could be, you know, a better placed, you know, your time. So
Yeah.
that's very interesting. What motivated you? Obviously, like you said, you really enjoyed being, you know, part of a clinical practice. So what motivated you to kind of make that shift from clinical practice to, you know, to the pharma, and what specific qualities did you seek within a company before making that transition?
Yeah, you know, it's the same kind of thread, which is I perform my best when I'm on a learning curve. And to a certain extent, you know, I had done 3 years of internal medicine. I was a chief resident, so 4 years of internal medicine. And then I did another 2 years of infectious diseases plus 7.5. You know, I have been practicing clinical medicine for more than 10 years as a trainee. And I felt like, you know, the next set of opportunity that was going to give me the most growth in terms of learning a new skill was really going into research. So that's why I made that first sort of move into academic research. And then when I looked at the industry move, it was again trying to learn a particular area of research, which is the translational medicine space. So the things that I was looking in industry were probably threefold. One is I wanted to be in a place where I could definitely learn a new skill. So it was very important for me to feel like the people in that industry not only had the expertise, but that they also had the time and the willingness to teach someone who didn't have that expertise. And that kind of ruled out a lot of small biotechs where, you know, people may have a lot of expertise, but they really have no time to be teaching anyone anything. I really wanted to be, you know, in a place that, you know, where I could still learn a lot. So that kind of put me in the medium to larger size type of industry. The other one is because I didn't have that expertise, I wanted to make sure that I contribute something. So I wanted to be in the infectious diseases space. You know, I always feel like, you know, you can, when you bring something to the table, it's much easier to get something from people in terms of the learning, but you can't just go as an adult and just want to learn. You're not at university. You have to actually do a job. So I looked for opportunities where I felt like I could bring a lot to the table from the infectious diseases clinical side and from the academic research I had done, which was immunology. And then the third piece, which, you know, it's in no order of importance, is, you know, nice people. Like you want to work in an environment where you know, you like going to work and you like your coworkers. And at the time I chose Novartis, and it was probably one of the best choices of my life. I mean, I really learned a lot and work with an amazing group of people. A lot of them are still dear friends to me. So
Yeah, no, obviously they've got an amazing rep in Boston. I think everyone says the same. I think it's one of the best places to learn, and I think that's another really important aspect is where that first opportunity comes in industry is where you're going to pick up a lot of your habits and skills and that you'll use for the rest of your career. So you want to make sure that's you know, somewhere that trains you well. So no, again, that's really interesting. And what do you think, you know, in terms of obviously your time at Novartis, you spent, you know, a huge amount of time there and in different positions. Tell me a bit more about, you know, that as a learning experience and, you know, the key learnings you took away from your time at Novartis.
You know, probably two types of learning, right? There's the content, the technical expertise. So, you know, I was lucky enough to be involved in a lot of programs of a lot of different modalities. So, you know, we did small molecules, we did monoclonal antibodies, we were looking at immune modulators. You know, I looked at gene therapy. So, a lot of modalities, sort of hands-on learning with programs and a lot of modalities. That was incredibly learning. We also had a lot of different type of pathogens. So I did antiviral, I did antibiotics, I did, you know, monogenetic neurologic diseases. So all of that technical expertise was valuable. And part of the technical expertise that you learn in a large company is when you have different subject matter experts that you're working on a day-to-day basis. So, a cross-functional global team in a large pharma typically has 5, 6 to 8 or 10 completely different expertises, put together in a team. So you get to learn a lot about things that you're not an expert on, toxicology and pharmacokinetics and chemistry and, technical development. So although you don't learn that technically to the level of being an expert, you really start understanding all the pieces that need to come together to develop a drug. So that was probably, 70 or 80% of the most valuable learning I had. And then the other piece is really soft skills, right? So as you progress in industry, you learn how to be a leader, you learn how to lead teams, you learn how to make decisions in an efficient way, you learn how to be transparent, how to, kind of think about strategy, when to zoom in and when to zoom out. So all of that was, I would say, the other kind of big learning. And that includes a lot of communication. How do you persuade? How do you, drive a program? How do you convince stakeholders or manage the stakeholders in a way that, that ultimately your team is successful? So that, that I would say wasn't minor. It was pretty important too, as well as a technical piece of it. And that's probably one of the reasons I stayed for so long and did well, was because, I started as an associate director, and by the time I left, I was the head of my group. So it really gives you a breadth of different soft skills that you have to have at all levels, whether you're an associate or you're actually the head. You still need those sort of soft skills to navigate a multicultural global organization that is high paced and sort of high, high performance.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think being in the translational medicine team benefited you in terms of having the experiences, like you said, because you're looking at so many different range of modalities, and instead of being in necessarily kind of a late stage focused position?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, during my career, starting probably year 3 or 4, every year there was some conversation about, should I go and do late stage? And, there's many valuable learnings of doing a late stage program and taking something to registration. And, so I think all aspects of drug development have equal importance. But for sure, for me, for my, my sort of physician scientist sort of identity, the best place to be was early, because you really are testing the hypothesis and really sort of honing in on the PK, the PD, sort of the foundation of a drug, so to speak. And it gives you a lot more versatility. When you're in a larger phase 3 program, you are fully dedicated to one program, and it moves a lot slower. So in the same amount of time, you have less exposure to other things, whether it's in the early space. When I left Novartis, I think we had, I don't know, 13 or 14 programs under our group. So that's a lot of diversity of challenges and programs that you're seeing at any, given time. So that was incredibly helpful. I mean, I did dabble with late stage a little bit. When I did the gene therapies, that was a late stage, program. It was actually phase 3B study that I was sort of leading. And of course, as a translational medicine person, you work very closely with the late development folks, because we supported all the clinical pharmacology for the late stage programs. But, I always found that for me, my happier place was earlier, which is why when I decided to leave Novartis, I went sort of even earlier. I've never made the move to later. I still may someday.
I find everyone I speak to, they always have a preference. I guess it's just, like you said, some people really love driving it, pushing it, doing that last bit of development, and others really like doing the nitty gritty. I like
that is the one thing I always tell when I speak to younger people, or people that are looking for mentors. I always tell them, like, you will hear from someone, this is the path, and you have to understand that's their path. That's not your path. And equally, when people come and ask me, oh, what did you do? I want to do what you did. I'm like, you can't because you're not me. So you'll build your own path. I mean, you can hear from all kinds of different paths, but you have to ultimately build your own path. It's not like you can copy somebody else's path.
Exactly, exactly. That's probably one of the most important things any young physician can hear, and I think obviously the pressure isn't trying to be very successful and high performing, but at the end of the day, like you said, you're the only one that kind of makes the influence on what path you pick. So I think that's a key takeaway. I want to just kind of zoom out for a bit and just focus on one question that I get asked a lot from both companies and physicians. Obviously, I know you have a continued relationship with Brigham and Harvard Med as well, and in terms of seeing patients. Is that something you feel has benefited you and the companies you've worked with, being still connected to the patients that you ultimately are having an impact on?
Yes and no. So one thing, for example, at Novartis was that I didn't feel like there was a direct conflict of interest between my clinical work and my Novartis work because I wasn't working in the HIV space at Novartis at all, and that was the bulk of my work as a clinician. And that was good, not to feel that there was a conflict of interest to a certain extent, because a lot of people in the clinical work and academia, they don't necessarily know a lot about industry, and I didn't want that perception to kind of, cloud my work to a certain extent. But yes, in that it is incredibly helpful to still be affiliated to an academic institution where there's a lot of clinical expertise in a lot of areas. You have access pretty much to the entire staff of physicians for anything. So that's very helpful. I have a lot of friends that are, real KOLs, key opinion leaders in their areas of clinical work. They are literally one phone call away. So that makes it very, very helpful. You're also in an environment where there's a lot of lectures and teaching and ground rounds. So if you have the time and there's a particular interest, it's very easy. So for example, if I'm going to start like a sickle cell program, just to say something, it's very easy to very rapidly get engaged with a group of people that treat sickle cell patients at the Brigham or whatnot, and sort of, get a sense of the space. So I found it to be, not just personally rewarding as a doctor to continue to treat my patients, but as it related to my roles in industry, very, very relevant. And certainly now in venture, it's even more relevant to be closer to academia and to sort of cutting edge science, as we think about building new companies. So yeah, it's been a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, definitely. I think actually as one element I never really thought of is obviously, like you said, when you potentially have connections within, say, Brigham within neurology, and you might be, highly trained in say neurology, but if you work in a broader setting in the industry, you might actually not know many KOLs or, like you said, private investigators in potentially infectious diseases, and being part of an institution like that will open so many doors for you to actually, speak with these people, which ultimately will make your life, a lot easier. So, yeah, again, I think that's, really important to look at.
And I've
Sorry,
been
go
in
on.
calls where I call a colleague because I have a patient that, that has, I don't know, osteoarthritis, and I give them a call to discuss a case. And then the last few minutes I say, and by the way, what do you think about this? So it's very easy to, it's very easy to, yeah.
Yeah,
When
mate,
you're
that
part of the system. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I suppose it's like alumni of of a college or something as well, or med school or something. Well, no, that's great. Well, I guess one thing I really wanted to speak to you about was obviously making the transition now from industry to venture capital. What attracted you to this field?
Oh, so many things. I mean, I think when you're in industry, at a certain level, you're no longer shielded from the business side of, of the drug development process, right? Like you start very much in the research and the science and the clinical development, which is clinical research. But eventually, as you progress, you start seeing all the business side of drug development, which is critically important. So that's an area that I became sort of very aware of, when I was the head of, my group and at Novartis. So opportunity to move entirely into a space that was primarily dedicated to the financing and the business side of how do you actually take an idea and how does an idea become a therapeutic or eventually a medicine. That was really fascinating for me. And this really happens early in venture capital. I mean, it's sort of that merging of academia, knowledge, and venture capital sort of financing that sort of gives rise to this new companies, biotechs, and so sometimes it happens, of course, in big pharma, but I would say by and large in the Boston area, the ecosystem is one of really academia and venture capital. So that was sort of fascinating. And then this particular opportunity at MPM really had other components to it. It again, just like the previous time I said, that's great, but I don't know much about financing, so I better bring something to the table. I mean, obviously, I had all my technical drug development skills, but bringing my virology and infectious diseases skill was important. And it was sort of a match of MPM's needs and what I could bring to the table, because they were at the time looking for someone that had my sort of skill set in terms of my specialty, infectious diseases and virology. So that that pretty much sealed the deal for me, because here I'm giving an opportunity to be an investor, even though I didn't have that background at all. And I bringing a lot of technical and subject matter expertise and sort of learning all the venture and investor side of it. So it was really a unique opportunity. And then I always, after a while, I want to learn something new. So it was perfect timing too. I don't think I would have done it if I had been in industry 2 years or 3 years, I probably, wouldn't have done it. But I felt like, I've mastered this skill. I certainly can jump and learn another one.
Yeah, definitely. I was literally just going to say that. I think obviously it's like that itch to learn something, and test yourself almost and see if you can be, successful elsewhere, which I think is very inspiring. So do you think it was again, like as you mentioned, the due diligence when you're at Novartis, looking at these companies and then using that skill set and in obviously in the setting of actually investing in companies yourself?
Yes and no. I mean, I think a lot of people at Novartis that I work with were a lot more involved with the business development organizations in terms of, I mean, I always contributed to due diligences at Novartis as a subject matter expert. And, again, and then as a leader, I was very aware of sort of the business development organization. But I don't think, like when I was in industry, that was not an area that I was particularly attracted to in terms of, oh, I want to spend time doing business development. I mean, I probably could have done that shift internally. It was super helpful because I know how a diligence works, but it's also very different. The diligence in large pharma is very, you have in your team and your due diligence team, you have like 10 or 15 or however many deep experts in each of the areas. So it's very in-depth sort of due diligence, because the type of investments that pharma is making are, substantially larger than the investments we're doing in VC. So you can't fully replicate the due diligence. It's very different. And the questions and the risks and the sort of the type of deals are also very different from business development. So I would say it's helpful, but I wouldn't say it's sort of a required or straight line path from business development to venture capital. I mean, I think we're all in the same ecosystem, right? But it's different. It's a little bit more entrepreneurial, I would think, in the venture capital side, and it's a little bit more hands-on. You don't have the whole infrastructure that a business development team has. They have access to, all this sort of expertise. It's not like that.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes sense. I guess obviously with some of the the macro events that have happened over the last few years as well, that have probably changed the investment landscape. One question I frequently get asked by other executives in biotech, but not only also physicians potentially that have, like I said, an academic setting that potentially looking at spinning off that might be potential investment for you guys. What are the factors, the critical factors you consider when evaluating potential investments in companies or spin-offs?
Depends on the stage of investment, of course. And if you're making a very early investment for a seed or a Series A or company formation, you focus a lot on the science. I think for if you're making a later investment in a company that's in the middle of a clinical stage program, then of course execution of the clinical program and clinical strategy becomes really key. In some cases, IP, depending on how the type of deal and where the assets came from, the IP becomes a big component of it. And then I would say for all of our investments, we do, this is something that's unique to MPM. Oh, well, I shouldn't say unique to MPM, but I should say it varies from VC to VC. So it may be different in other places. But for us, it's really important that we end up with a medicine for patients. So we have probably, I'm going to brag a little bit, but since I've only been here 18 years, I'm not really bragging on my behalf. I'm sort of bragging on MPM's behalf. But I think MPM has, from companies that MPM has either founded or been the lead investor early on, or again, companies that they form, I mean, they have, 54 or 55 FDA approved drugs. I mean, that's a track record that not even big pharma sometimes has to have so for us, it's really important as part of the diligence that we actually see a path to clinical development and to a registration to a product that can be ultimately marketed and that people will have access to. So that's always a big part of our diligence. Even if it's a seed investment, we're already thinking, what are you going to use this for? What medical problem are you going to solve? And is this, we do this sort of 2x2 technical feasibility and, and the ability to actually execute on that sort of technical feasibility, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really astonishing. Actually, I didn't realize it was quite like that. But I guess there's also a dynamic that's slightly changing where we're coming into potentially a new era focused on cost as well for patients. I think we're seeing now certain drugs, like you said, getting to approval, commercialization, but the market might not be there. Or I think obviously BioMarin is an example for. Do you think that's going to be a continued interest? Is like you said, the cost element? What's the standard of care? Is this drug going to be successful if we do get it to commercialization?
Yeah, I think more and more we're thinking about differentiation, which is where all this, or a lot of this conversation starts. Like, what value are you really bringing with this new medicine? What real world value are you bringing with this new medicine? And, and based, sort of value-based cost to a certain extent, or value-based pay, as opposed to, the number of pills that you're selling. So I think for us, building in a sort of scientific way, sort of have this quantitative ways of ultimately delivering value is going to be really necessary as we sort of engage in, like you said, in this new era of being more cognizant about, the cost and access. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, as an infectious diseases physician, it's a hard topic because infectious diseases is probably one of the areas that is sort of least valued from a financial standpoint, even though it has tremendous value from a human standpoint. I mean, I can't think of many things that were as transformative as penicillin. Nobody wants to live in a post-antibiotic era, and yet it's an area where value has not been well assigned. I mean, people are willing to pay $80,000 for a car, but not for an antibiotic that will save your life. So I don't know how that math works.
Yeah, maybe it's a societal shift before anything else. Well, I think that it kind of gives you an idea, or people an idea of what VCs potentially are looking at when it comes to the company. What from your perspective, what qualities do you think defines a successful physician in venture capital?
You mean success for the companies or for us?
Yeah, I suppose there's two questions in that, exactly like you said.
Yeah.
I suppose, yeah, I suppose, you know, for the company, what do MPM look for a physician, and what does the physician look for to be successful with MBC?
Yeah, yeah. One thing that we see sometimes that, really is a big positive in companies is when you have thoughtful clinical development plans, as a physician that really go beyond your immediate sort of, I can do a proof of concept and then we're going to get acquired. That doesn't, that doesn't go well. I think physicians that are in the business of clinical development really need to think sort of that string of pearls of, the first experiment, how is that going to inform your second experiment and your third experiment, all the way until you're to an NDA. So I think building clinical development plans that are realistic in terms of execution, and that also allow you then to put a cost to what the clinical development is, really is critical as we look at an investment opportunity. And I think a lot of biotechs fail at that. A lot of biotechs basically said, oh, we just need $30 million to get to a phase 1. And I'm like, that's not a thoughtful clinical development plan. Like, I want to see, what is it going to take patient-wise, trial-wise? What do you need? All the pieces to be able to take this to market. And then we can break down the cost, and then we can figure out how much money I'm going to give you in terms of where the value is across that sort of timeline. We rarely see that, and we try to build that ourselves. Again, at MPM, we have a very extensive group of very seasoned drug developers, are part of our executive partnership, so we could try to do that. But it's always hard to do that when you're not in the program, because you're coming in as an outsider. So a good clinical development plan that is realistic from an execution as well as budgeted is critically important. And it's really what's going to make us sometimes say, okay, this is an A team, a B team, or a C team. And I have to tell you, I've learned this over the last 18 months. Is not something that I was conscious about, which is kind of weird because it's the same at Novartis and everywhere, right? Like 90% is the team and the people, or 99% is the team of the people. But sometimes you find really good ideas, and if the teams around those ideas are not good teams, I think that the risk just goes exponentially higher. And sometimes we have said no to deals that we would have done with a different team, for example.
Yeah.
So it's really important that, the physicians who are primarily on the clinical development side really build solid, full clinical development plans, and not just build a plan to get to the next Series A or financing. And then the other piece, and I think this goes, both ways for the VCs as well as for the, sometimes there's a lack of humbleness in the ecosystem. People oversell and overpitch, and then also on our side, we we're overconfident about our own abilities and sort of make judgments that maybe are, so there needs to be a lot more humbleness in the ecosystem, I would say. And I always welcome that. I mean, I always welcome a company that is intellectually honest about their differentiation and intellectually honest about their competitive intelligence landscape. Sometimes I see these decks where, you have in each column like a competitor, and then everything is red and yours is everything green. I mean, those are my worst. I mean, when I see that, I'm like, no, you lost me. Like, that's not, like, it's so common, and it's like a checkbox. It's not even like, you get the data, and at the end of it, this is how I've already showed you how we differentiate. It's just like this picking and choosing the competitive intelligence. So that's the kind of, you can never underestimate the person that's in front of you. that's true for us when we evaluate companies. I mean, some people, you know, you have founders there that have 35 years of foundational research on a pathway. There's no way as an investor I'm going to even remotely know what they know about, I don't know, TIM3. But the other way around is also true. I mean, I think a lot of companies underestimate investors, and we have the benefit of having seen a lot of people like you, a lot of companies, and we have seen a lot of successes and failures in boards and teams. And so I think that humbleness is necessary.
Yeah, exactly. I guess it's learning from your mistakes in the past from both sides. And I guess, would you say that not every VC and company are always, you know, a great fit? I suppose some VCs might be a better fit for, you know, for some companies. The same way, you know, in terms of the profile of company, you might not be interested in, but another company might.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we start every interaction with our biotechs by doing a, you know, 5-10 minute introduction of MPM and who we are culturally and as an investor firm and what we're looking for and how we operate. And I think it's critically important that the companies listen to that and try to figure out, is this a fit for us or not? And vice versa. We do the same with the teams. I mean, that's part of what we're like, you know, we can't work with this team, we're out, even if it's a good idea. And sometimes it's not even the team, sometimes the stage, the valuation. I mean, there's so many components, right, that come into play. It's almost like the stars really have to align. We're in the business of saying no 9 out of 10 times. So for sure, it's a little bit, you know, it is a match for both, for the companies and for us. So, I mean, in this environment, of course, there's financing has become hard. So you do hear from biotechs that have, you know, done the rounds and have talked to every investor, and you know, it becomes a little bit less personalized because it's like whoever's going to give me, write a check for me. But in the ideal world, there should be somewhat of a match. And more importantly, or equally important, you know, you have to be thoughtful about your syndicate and your board. The worst thing for a C-suite is to have a board that, you know, that doesn't really, you know, that is not helping the company, that is sort of hindering the company. And the opposite is also true. The worst thing for a board is to have a board that is non-functioning, non-decision making, or a C-suite that is not really, you know, executing or managing on, you know, the strategies or, you know, whatever the board feels needs to happen, right? So I think that's a key piece of it, right? When you're bringing a syndicate together and when you're thinking about who's your C-suite, I mean, yeah, that's critically important.
Yeah, so you know, if you're looking for investment, I guess do your due diligence on you know, on who you are looking to be part of your company, and make it personalized. You know, really get to know the people that you're going to be working with closely. I guess because when things do sometimes get a little bit tough, you want to make sure that you're in the room with the right people.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I think hopefully that's given an you know, insight into a bit more about VCs as well, and obviously, you know, how to structure your career as a physician, or maybe how not to, but you know, at least to maybe hope some helpful points for physicians in, you know, earlier stages in their career. But thanks so much for joining me, and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, thank you, Will. Always a pleasure.
Thanks so
Best of
much.
luck to the BPA
Yeah,
work.
thanks so much. Speak soon. Bye, Florencia.